You won't believe what happened to me that night. I had just finished washing the dishes, my hands still damp from rinsing the last coffee cup, when my son Daniel said something that made me stop in my tracks. We've always been close, but this was different. It was unexpected, emotional, and it changed the way I looked at him and at myself. But before I tell you what Daniel said, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? I'd love for you to share it down in the comments. Every time I see the places our little family here on Love and Tears is tuning in from, it warms my heart. All right, let's begin. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in early October. The kind of night when the wind hums softly against the windows and the house itself feels like it's breathing out after a long day. Dinner had been simple roast chicken thighs, green beans, and mashed potatoes. Nothing fancy. Daniel had come over after work. He's 28 now, taller than I ever imagined he'd grow. But his eyes still hold that same boyish softness I remember from when he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. At the table, he barely touched his food, just pushed it around. I didn't press him. I've learned that sometimes silence is the only space a man needs to gather his thoughts. After dinner, I told him to sit on the couch while I tidied up. The living room glowed in the warm amber light of the lamp beside the fireplace. He sat there, hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the old family photos on the wall. I could tell something was stirring inside him. I dried my hands, walked over and sat beside him. Our shoulders brushed, and he didn't move away. That's when I knew this was serious. "You all right?" I asked softly, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he turned toward me, his eyes, searching his expression, caught somewhere between ache and something else I couldn't name. "Mom," he said, finally his voice low and deliberate. "Can I ask you something personal?" My heart skipped. "Of course," I replied, though I could already feel a knot forming in my chest. Daniel's hands were clenched together, knuckles pale. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about how much you gave up for me. For everything." I blinked, caught off guard. "You were always there," he went on. "School plays, sleepless nights, long drives to soccer practice. Even when your back was hurting, even after Dad left. You never dated again. You just poured everything into me. And now I'm grown, and I wonder, did you ever resent that? Did I take too much from you?" No one had ever asked me that before, not even myself. He looked at me with so much raw honesty that I felt the tears sting my eyes. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling, "you were never a burden. You were my reason." But he shook his head gently. "I know you believe that. But sometimes people don't realize what they've given up until it's too late." The room fell quiet, filled only by the steady ticking of the clock above the mantel. And then he asked the question that pierced through me. "Mom, are you happy truly? Or are you just pretending for me?" I couldn't breathe for a moment. It felt like the air had been stolen from my lungs. All the birthdays, the late nights, the scraped knees, the job losses, the endless talks, and here at last was the question I had never dared to ask myself. Was I happy? I looked at my son, this man, who once fit in my arms like a bundle of blankets, and in his eyes, I saw not only worry, but love. A deep, aching love no one else had ever given me in quite that way. I reached out and placed my hand over his. His grip tightened instantly, as though he had been waiting for that touch for years. I don't know if I'm happy, I admitted softly. But I do know one thing: you have never stopped making me proud. We sat there, hands clasped, and for a long time, no more words were needed. The firelight flickered gently across the walls, painting them in soft gold. I could feel something shifting between us. Not strange, not uncomfortable, but deeply human. A recognition of all that had passed between mother and son, and of all the unspoken things still waiting between us. That night, something opened. Not broken, just open. And what came next, I never could have seen it coming. After Daniel went home, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp spilling across the floor. My hand still tingled from where he had held it, not because of the touch itself, but because of what it meant. For the first time, my son saw me not only as mom, the one who cooked, cleaned, and always showed up, but as a woman, a human being with a past, with dreams, with heartache of her own. For days his words echoed inside me. Are you truly happy? And the truth was, I didn't know how to answer. I had spent 20 years living in groceryless utility bills, endless chores. Happiness wasn't something I thought about for myself. It was always for someone else. That following Sunday, Daniel came again. This time he carried Chinese takeout. "You're not cooking tonight," he said with a smile. I laughed, but behind his smile, I could still sense a weight. We sat out on the porch, autumn air crisp, the trees whispering in the breeze. I wrapped myself in a shawl and rocked slowly in my chair while he leaned against the railing sipping tea. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes fixed on the horizon, "about what you said last week." I nodded, waiting, and I realized something. You gave me everything, but I don't think I ever asked. What do you want? Not just back then, but now. I looked at him, my heart aching with both pride and sorrow. "Daniel, I don't regret anything. You were my life's purpose." He turned, then eyes carrying that same gentle ache. "But what's your purpose now?" That question cut even deeper. I don't know," I admitted softly. "I haven't thought about it." There was a silence. Then Daniel crossed the porch, knelt beside my chair, and took both my hands in his. "I want to know you," he whispered. "Not just the mother who raised me. I want to know Isabella, the woman you were before me, the woman you still are now." My throat tightened. No one's ever asked me that, I said, my voice barely audible. "Not in a very long time," he smiled faintly. "Then let me be the first again." And so we talked. For hours, I told him about my childhood, about my first kiss, about the poems I used to write, but never showed anyone, about the dreams I had tucked away when life demanded more practical things. He listened. Not just hearing, but absorbing every word, as if I were telling him something sacred. "I never knew you loved art," he said at one point. "You always supported me, but I guess I never asked where that came from." I laughed through a tear. I used to sit on my bedroom floor, sketching for hours. I even dreamed of studying painting in college. But then, your father and I, well, life got in the way. Daniel's face shifted, like he was realizing for the first time that he had only known part of me. I want you to start again, he said suddenly. Painting, writing whatever it is for you. Not for me, not for anyone else. I smiled, shaking my head gently. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You begin where you left off, he said firmly. And I'll be here, cheering you on. That moment wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. A turning point. The roles were shifting. I wasn't just the guide anymore. I was being guided too. Later that night, when I walked him to the door, he paused at the threshold. I meant what I said, he told me. I don't want us to just sit around talking about the weather or eating dinner. I want real time with you. Honest time. A warm flutter bloomed in my chest. Next weekend, he added, I'm staying over. No distractions, just us. I want to know more. I hadn't expected that. Not from a grown man with his own life, his own apartment. But I welcomed it. When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, my eyes shut. Something inside me had opened, and I wasn't ready to close it again. The week crept by slowly. Every hour seemed stretched, drawn out with anticipation. I hadn't felt this nervous in years. Not since my very first date in high school, when I'd spent hours deciding on earrings, only to forget them at home. But this wasn't a date. This was my son. And yet, it felt like I was preparing for someone new. I dusted corners of the house I hadn't touched in months, rearranged throw pillows, lit candles I had been saving for someday. And almost without realizing it, I pulled out my old wooden sketchbox, the one Daniel never even knew I kept. Inside were brittle charcoal pencils, dried up tubes of acrylic little fragments of a woman I used to be. Saturday finally came. Daniel arrived just after 6, an overnight bag slung over his shoulder and a bottle of red wine in his hand. You didn't have to bring anything, I told him, half laughing. I wanted to, he said warmly. Something simple. To mark a new chapter. We cooked together. Or rather, I cooked while he chopped onions and teased me for wearing the same old apron from his childhood. The faded lettering still read, Best Mom Ever. Stained, worn, but whole. Dinner wasn't filled with surface laughter, the kind we give to strangers. No, this was different laughter, born of memory. Burnt holiday meals, broken picture frames from indoor soccer. Late-night talks after heartbreak. Afterward, I brought out an old photo album he hadn't seen in years. Pictures where, for once, I was in the frame. Daniel stopped at one photo in particular. I was 24, sitting on the floor of our first apartment painting in the sunlight. You looked free, he whispered. I stared at it, too startled by the wild light in my own eyes. I hadn't seen her, that younger version of me, in a very long time. I think I used to be, I admitted softly. Daniel leaned back, thoughtful. You still can be. The wine warmed me. But it wasn't the alcohol. It was the intimacy. The honesty of being seen. He asked me about my past, carefully, respectfully. After Dad left, he said, I always wondered why you never brought someone else into our lives. I took a breath. I was scared. Not of love, but of losing focus. I didn't want anything to take away from being your mother. He nodded quiet for a moment, but now I hesitated the words, heavy, but true. Now I wonder if maybe I held myself back too much. Maybe I forgot I was allowed to want something more. Daniel turned toward Dee, eyes steady. You are allowed. You always were. You just didn't have someone to remind you. The room was hushed, lit only by the soft glow of the fireplace, and the kitchen light we had forgotten to switch off. The clock ticked steadily a heartbeat against the silence, and then Daniel did something unexpected, something that made the air between us shift. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, the way I had done for him 1,000 times when he was little. It was small, almost nothing. But in that moment, I felt something stir, something tender, something not maternal, but deeply, achingly human. I didn't pull away. We sat there, inches apart. The silence between us, full alive. Neither of us dared to speak, afraid that words might shatter whatever it was that had just begun to bloom. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence between us. Would you show me, he asked. I frowned, not understanding. Show you what? He nodded toward the old wooden sketch box resting on the table. Your art. I want to see what you used to create. My hands trembled as I opened it, the hinges creaking softly. Inside lay cracked pastels, brittle pencils, and sheets of faded paper. I hadn't touched them in years, but the moment I did, memories came rushing back, the smell of graphite, the scrape of pencil on paper, the weight of dreams I once carried. I pulled out an old sketch, the face of a woman unfinished. Delicate lines hinted at sorrow. Daniel studied it carefully. She looks lonely, he murmured. I swallowed. She was. He didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at me. I don't want you to be lonely, he said quietly. Not anymore. And for the first time in decades, I let someone truly see that hidden ache inside me. We didn't sleep right away. Instead, we stayed on the couch, late into the night, talking about art, about aging, about regrets, and hopes that still lingered, like sparks waiting to catch. Nothing happened that would raise eyebrows. No lines were crossed. Yet something shifted permanently. He no longer saw me only as Mom. He saw me as a woman. A life still worth knowing, still worth exploring. And I no longer saw him as just my son. I saw him as a man I could share all of myself with, openly, vulnerably, without fear. The next morning changed me again. I woke in the stillness that only exists before dawn, the sky outside, painted in pale blue-gray. For a long moment, I didn't move, just lay beneath the quilt my mother once passed down, listening. I wondered if Daniel was still asleep on the couch, curled up as he used to after a nightmare. Quietly, I wrapped myself in my robe and padded down the hall. But he was already awake, sitting by the window, staring at the horizon as light crept across the sky. You couldn't sleep either, I asked softly. He turned, smiling faintly. Didn't want to waste the stillness. I sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder. It had already become our new rhythm. I kept thinking about last night, he said. I feel like I saw you for the first time. The real you. His words warmed me, but they also unsettled me. fragile truths stirred inside. I didn't realize how much of myself I had tucked away. I admitted. Not out of shame, just habit. Daniel turned fully toward me, gaze steady. Then maybe it's time to let her out again. All of her. Not just the parts that raised me. I drew a deep breath. I'm not even sure who that is anymore. He shook his head gently. She's still right here. We sat quietly, watching the world brighten. The light spilled across the floor, soft and golden, and I noticed how peaceful he looked, not burdened by what we had shared, but calmed by it. I wish I could go back, he said after a while, and tell my teenage self to ask you more questions, to see the woman behind the mum. This time I reached for his hand, not out of comfort, but connection. You're doing that now, I whispered. He smiled, lifting my hand between both of his palms, like something fragile, precious. And in that quiet moment, I felt the shift deepen, an understanding closeness I never thought possible. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a man, and he was looking at me as someone who still mattered. Not for what I did, but for who I was, and who I could still become. We spent the morning slowly. Breakfast, gentle music from the old speaker, laughter soft and unhurried. An unspoken understanding carried between us. When he packed to leave, I walked him to the door just as I always had. But this time his embrace was different. Not a quick hug, but a long, anchoring hold. You're not alone anymore, he whispered against my shoulder. Even when I'm not here. My eyes stung. I know. He pulled back, looking into me. Promise me something. Anything. Don't disappear again. Let the world see you the way I see you now. My throat tightened, but I nodded. After he left, I stood at the window and watched his car pull away. Sunlight catching the windshield like a spark. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive with possibility. I walked back to the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor, the old sketchbox waiting before me. This time I didn't hesitate. I pulled out a blank sheet, picked up the charcoal pencil, and I began to draw. Not the lonely woman I had been, but the woman I was now awake, seen, loved. A woman ready at last to rediscover herself. And as I drew, I thought of you, our family here on Love and Tears. Tell me, have you ever tucked away a part of yourself for so long that you forgot it was there? And if so, what would it mean to finally let that part of you live again? Share it with me in the comments. I'd love to know. The lines began to take shape, slowly, hesitant at first, then more certain. Each stroke felt like a return, a reintroduction to a part of myself I had long neglected. The woman on the page wasn't young, but she wasn't defeated either. Her eyes carried both weight and light, the kind that only comes from surviving, from loving, from continuing. When I finally set the pencil down, the room was filled with morning light. I leaned back, looking at what I had created, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the absence of something. I felt presence my own. Carl's words echoed in me, not as an instruction, but as a reminder. I didn't need to wait for someone else to grant me permission. I was allowed to want to try, to fail, to begin again. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, breathing with possibility. I placed the drawing on the mantel, not to hide it away, but to keep it where I could see it every day. And as I made myself another cup of coffee, I smiled, not the polite smile I had given the world for years, but the small private smile of someone who had finally decided to step back into her own life. The story wasn't finished. It was just beginning again.